Hi, everybody. This is the Hungry Math Professor here, and today I'm going to be talking about Exile and the Kingdom by Albert Camus. This is a collection of short stories that was published in 1957. So this is after The Stranger, The Myth of Sisyphus, The Rebel, and The Fall, all these books, which I'm also going to read and discuss. Several of those I've already discussed, except for The Rebel. So this comes after all that, so it's fairly mature in the timeline, or it's one of the last things that he publishes before his untimely death. And I will say, first of all, I just to start by saying I love short stories, and I discovered this by reading Ted Chiang's short stories. And these are not like those at all, but I will say the medium of short stories to me is very exciting because in a matter of like an hour or two or three, you get through an entire story. You get to start and end the story and just kind of like get a full idea in that short amount of time. And also in a short story, you don't have to spend as much time developing all kinds of characters and developing all kinds of setting. You're able to just kind of communicate maybe one central idea, which is really kind of fun. And just like when you read a novel, usually in a novel, the first 50 to 100 pages, you're not quite completely grabbed by the novel yet. And then there's some point, you usually don't even pinpoint it, where you just make a transition and you're just hooked to the book. And what's interesting with a short story is the same thing happens, but now it's much faster. Usually the first 3 to 5 pages, you're not bored, but you're not that interested. And then there's this kind of switch where you're like, wow, I'm really hooked on this story. And then what's interesting is that you get the entirety of it until the ending. Like I read all these in one sit, not all of them, all six of them in one sitting, but each of them I read on their own in one sitting. And there's just something really satisfying about reading a story like that and getting an idea. But the six short stories all fit a certain theme as well, even though they all take place in different settings and different characters and things like that. They're all exploring themes, the kind of things you expect from Camus, like loneliness, the idea of being a stranger or an outsider in some kind of community, the tension between independence and interdependence, like the tension between the desire to self-actualize and become who you want to be, but also the desire to have other people in your life. So that means you have to put up with the constraints that come with other people and the misunderstanding that happens when you're in a different culture or a different land, a different customs, so on and so forth. This kind of thing is throughout Camus' writing that I've been reading, The Fall and The Stranger, for sure. And then in The Myth of Sisyphus, you get a more direct sort of essay on philosophy, but you still have this sense that, I mean, you can't help but assume that Camus felt like he didn't quite fit in. And he's clearly a very talented artist. So perhaps, like a lot of artists, he didn't feel like he was completely understood by the people around him, or always felt this desire to be himself and create something new. All these kind of typical things that you hear from various different artists. Um, it seems clear that Camus must have been feeling these things to some degree. Though if you look up Camus' personality, he was extremely sociable and outgoing. So it's not that he struggled to communicate with people or talk to them or approach them. But just because you can talk to somebody doesn't mean that you feel understood by them, or doesn't mean that you feel that you're really communicating them in a deep way. And you can't help but think that he maybe struggled with that. And also, he's famously he had two different wives, and he was unfaithful to both of them. And so, there's this question of like, uh, how did he struggle to sort of connect with these people, or was that just the way that he wanted to live his life? And I didn't mean to get so much into that. There's six short stories. I don't want to talk through all of them. I'm just going to focus on one, which is called Jonas, or The Artist at Work. And it's one of the longer ones. I mean, it's not that long. It's 40 pages, but most of them are around 20 pages long. And then there's the two last stories are about 40 pages long. So they're all, quite short and really enjoyable. Maybe the least favorite of mine was the first one called The Adulterous Wife. But let's talk about Jonas, or the artist at work. So in the beginning of this story, you meet Jonas, who is an artist, but he hasn't been discovered yet. And he believes in this thing that he calls the star, which is what he attributes to his talent. And people will, like, if people give him a compliment about his work, he will say, oh, it's not really me, it's this star. And you're never really given any clarification as to what the star is. You're never told, like, that it's some kind of if it's some kind of collecting item that he has or some kind of thing he believes that he has inside of his soul or something. You're never told, but the way I see it, it's some kind of belief in some kind of innate talent that was given to him by some kind of transcendent force or, transcendent something that he just believes in. And he attributes to this sort of innate talent or this sort of transcendent force that gave him this innate talent. He gives all the credit to that throughout various different times in the story. So in the very beginning, he's like first being discovered, and there's some guy who offers him like a small apartment and a monthly fee if he can get the rights to sell his art. And Jonas says, "Oh yeah, that sounds great. I'll just get like it's not a lot of money, but I mean, I'm getting paid to do what I love. Like, this is great." And so him and his wife move into this small apartment, but it's just him and his wife, and there's plenty of space. And but then they start having kids, and they have one, two, three kids, and they're still in this really small apartment. But as they go along, you see like constantly they just find a way to make this small apartment work. And you're kind of rooting for them because they seem like you don't get a lot of information about the relationship, but it just seems like they have this good attitude about them in the beginning of the story that, they're willing to just kind of make things work and see the better side of things. They seem to be very positive and very accepting of their own circumstances and just like very willing to just make peace with what they have. And that seems like a very, very good qualities to have a successful relationship. But you don't get a lot of information about that. And Jonas's art starts to take off more and more, and he starts getting these like disciples and students and art critics and all these kind of people just want to hang out with him all the time. And I don't know why this is, but they somehow just wind up hanging out in the apartment. Or eventually they keep asking him to go out for lunch or dinner. And Jonas like doesn't really want to do this, but he understands that like, he's an artist, he's getting popular, he's got to like interact with these people. So he's constantly being taken either away from the apartment or just kind of distracted in the apartment itself. All this is happening while his wife is taking care of all the kids, and she seems just incredibly accommodating, perhaps too accommodating of all these different things that are going on. And again, they keep having these issues with not having enough space because now he's got too many students, there's too many guests all the time. And they keep making slight adjustments to the apartment. Oh, you know what? You should move your artist studio into the small kids' bedroom and the kids' bedroom, they'll stay over here. And then at some point that doesn't work anymore. And so, oh, you know what, you should move your art easel and things like that into our bedroom, and people won't lay on our bed, they'll be respectful, so they move all his art stuff into their bedroom, but people of course are not respectful and they sleep in his bed, so lay on their bed and things like. Anyway, they keep trying to make this work over and over and over again, and at some point he's gotten very popular, and they're in his bedroom. There's like a bunch of people in his bedroom, and his wife comes in to see what was going on, or maybe it was his friend who comes in to see what was going on. And like they're like you can think of this room as just being like really crowded, and the Jonas is up in the front somehow. He can't hear what's going on. And the friend is talking to some art critic in the back, and the art critic says something like, this is all over now. Basically Jonas has become too popular now, and this is just like a typical arc of an artist. They become too popular and they run out of ideas, or they sort of take the critics too serious, so on and so forth, and they just wind up nosediving, and of course his friend doesn't like hearing that, but doesn't know if he should believe this or if it's just some critic being too negative. And it turns out that this was right, and eventually Jonas's art he just like stops being inspired, and people don't seem to be as interested, and he doesn't have as many students and not as many critics coming by. And the guy who's paying him monthly says, "Hey, like I can still pay you, but I can't pay you as much anymore." And again, his wife tries to make the best of it, though he can tell that she's not happy. And at some point, Jonas starts to drink a lot. He starts to like, instead of working on art, he goes out and is drinking during the day, going to all different parts of town where people don't know him because he doesn't want to have to talk about his artwork. And he's just getting drunk all the time. And then at some point, he winds up having affair with this woman, and his wife catches him, and she's obviously upset, and Jonas comes home and says, I'm never going to do this again, and they make up. But Jonas is clearly in bad shape at this point, so he seems to stop drinking, or certainly stops going to out to bars. But he's clearly really depressed. He's clearly not inspired. He's not doing good artwork. But he has this big idea, which is he's going to like build like this artist loft in the apartment. He's going to. They talk about in the very beginning that there's lots of vertical space in this apartment, that there's like nothing they can do with it. And so he finally finds a use for this vertical space, and he just like builds like a makeshift loft for himself. And he's going to go work up in this loft. And there's like this moment where you think maybe he really is going to get work done in that loft. But unfortunately, he winds up just like hermitating himself up in this loft. He doesn't wind up working. People think he's working up there, but you find out he's not eating. He's just kind of meditating up there. Like, what the heck is this guy doing? And he's just kind of meditating, hoping for the star to kind of save the day. That this like innate talent, or this transcendent energy that gave him this innate talent, or whatever it is that he believes in. He thinks he needs to sort of pray to this thing or meditate on this thing so that it will sort of take over again and fill him with inspiration or whatever. You don't get a lot of insight into that. But that's how I sort of saw it. And it was kind of this sad ending where this family and this man is just kind of destroyed by a lack of motivation, and just by a deteriorating career. And it doesn't seem like this artist is able to find any way to just enjoy his wife and his family in the midst of this, or find some way to pivot to something else. He just winds up completely nosediving in his in and not able to successfully be provide for his family and things. And at the end, it ends with he had one his best friend goes up to see what he was doing up there, and there was just one art easel in the very middle of the easel is just two words written very small, or sorry, there's one word written very small, and the friend can't tell if the word is independence or interdependence. And again, it's this very like common theme in Camus and the rest of the existentialists, between this desire to sort of self-actualize, become exactly who you want to be, to figure out exactly who you are, all these kinds of things, to create what you want to create in yourself. And then there's this tension between those desires and the desire to be in community with other people, and the constraints that those other people place on us, which can constrain our ability to be exactly who we want to be. Of course, these two things are very much functions of each other, and who you are as an independent person and who you are as a part of a community, both of these things depend on each other and influence each other. They're not completely separate, but there's this tension in the existentialist writing and Camus' writing between these two things, and like how do you navigate? And for the most part, it seems like the existentialists lean towards the independent side, the self-actualization, the being who you want to be, and going against the grain of society, or going against the grain of typical morality and all these different things, being willing to criticize the way things have always been done. So anyway, that's just one of the short stories, and I think it's really powerful story. And again, you can read it in about an hour or two, which is very satisfying. But I enjoyed all the stories, so I encourage you to read them all and let me know what you think. And after this, I'm going to read The Rebel, and that will be my last book that I'm going to be discussing by Camus for a little while. So let me know what you think. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you at another video discussion.